but then also like asking the children, the youth, what they need in order to be successful, and then going a step further, asking their families what they need to be successful in supporting the young person, because oftentimes it's a lot going on around the behavior that they're showing, and it isn't just, I just want to be a criminal, or I want to go do the, like, it's not that.
Yeah, for sure. And before we move to the next question, could you, for folks who are not aware, could you say what an SRO is?
Oh, sorry. So school resource officer, police officer station, cops. Cops in schools is the way I talk about it. That's exactly right. I was trying to be a little bit more respectful. No, I'm just kidding. No, but yes.
Okay. Great. So in response to the needs of young people, we've got cops who have limited ways of responding, and it's mostly arrest and incarcerate and report. So yeah, already a failure before we ever start what the actual legal system, how they would treat folks once they get in. So, okay, thank you. So I'll turn to you, Chris. In your book, The Rage of Innocence, how America criminalizes black youth, you provide several examples of how toy guns, hoodies, hip hop are used by law enforcement as indicators of wrongdoing. Can you share more about the policing of black and brown youth and the trauma that causes?
Yeah, and let me say, when I talk about policing, I think it's important to talk about not just the police officer in the blue uniform, but the ways in which all of us in society police children, and black and brown children, right? And I think both within community and out community, when I say in and out, within communities of color and outside communities of color, we have really deprived black and brown children of the opportunity to play and to be children and to do all the things, as Liz says, a part of adolescence, right, is what? Impulsive, reactive, emotional, peer influence. I say all the time, kids not only do what their friends do. I love how the dean of students is nodding, right? Right? But kids not only do what their friends are doing, they do what they think their friends are doing, right? They don't think ahead to the long-term consequences. Well, guess what? All of us in this room did the same thing, whether we want to admit it or not, right? And
might still be doing it, some of them.
Right. But that part of what makes us successful adults is pushing limits, testing boundaries, and so we have to create space for that. Children are creative when they're testing boundaries and being impulsive and radical and all the things, right? But here's the reality. When we, even when we become annoyed with the recklessness of adolescence and that impulsivity, by and large, we still show grace, tolerance, redirection, support, humor even, for white children and children, of upper class. But black children, brown children are criminalized for virtually everything we know is part and parcel of adolescence. And I'm talking about everything from the way, the clothes that they wear, the way they style their hair, the music that they listen to, the friends that they sit with in the cafeteria, playing with toy guns in the park like Tamir, playing on their cell phone. I mean, the list goes on. And it includes, you all, experimenting with drugs, alcohol, and sex. And we sit here as adults and you're like, oh, I don't want you to do it too early. But the reality is that folks have done it for time immemorial and become presidents of the daggone United States, right? And we didn't criminalize them, we didn't send them, but that is not the privilege that black and brown children get. And to speak to your point about the trauma is really important. Like, I think we know intuitively that these encounters with police today are traumatizing, but there is now empirical research. They have been doing empirical research over the last 20 years showing that there's extraordinary psychological trauma just from the mere contact between police officers and children, and especially black and brown children, and particularly in those adolescent years, right, where our views about law and law enforcement become fixed in our heads. So when we have these early negative encounters with police and law enforcement, that has a long-term detrimental impact on how we engage with police in the future and whether or not we even believe it's worth it to participate in mainstream society, right? And I also have to say that the trauma comes not just from being the direct target of police contact, but also watching it, hearing about it, watching it on the internet, George Floyd being killed, Breonna. Do you think our kids are watching? Yes, they're watching, and they're traumatized. And so we all have a responsibility, in shifting that, right? Not only holding police officers, reducing police officers, reducing the footprint, radically reducing the footprint of police in the lives of all children, but especially Black and brown children, but making sure that when those rare circumstances where police are involved, that it is developmentally appropriate, right, for those kids, and that all of us have to be careful about how we surveil kids as well. So.
I just want to add one thing to that, and echoing everything that you're saying, Chris, is that OJJDP has documented the disparate treatment of young people of color for the past 30 years. We have a requirement in the Federal Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act that requires states to report data on this. And in 2018, that was updated to require states not just to address the overrepresentation of youth of color in the justice system, but to actually take steps to reduce the disparate treatment of young people of color in the justice system. And that data shows that at every stage in the justice system, from when that first contact is made all the way through the system, that the deeper you go in the system, the more disparate the treatment. And so that is something that has to be, states are required to take steps to reduce that. And I concur with what you're talking about in terms of the front end of the system as well. But we have that data and to show that disparate treatment does exist. So you hear anecdotes, but you also hear that the data is underscoring the need for substantial change in this system.
I really want to underscore that point, the ways in which, and I know this comment was made earlier about how we change hearts and minds, and that when we go out and talk, I use a combination of anecdotes and data. And data is absolutely essential, and the empirical social science research. And so I just want to say how much I appreciate the fact that we had in previous administrations of OJJDP where there was a gap in the enforcement of the data collection, and I appreciate how much you've brought that back in the reinforcement of that.
Well, and the data I think just illustrates the points that you're making, right? And the data was removed from our website, and we have it back up there, so you can see where the states are on this. And we also, I want to say 2 weeks ago, we announced that the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform at Georgetown University will be heading up a new training and technical assistance center to reduce racial and ethnic disparities across the country. So we have, a TA center focused exclusively on the disparate, reducing the disparate treatment of young people of color in the justice system.
Kenvin, I'd love to hear from you. So there's a question here for you. For young folks who have been involved, come into contact with the criminal legal system, and may have a record that's going to harm them long term, what can we do to help support them and help find a future that's successful for them and deal with some of the ramifications that Chris and Liz have been talking about?
Yeah, I think that the first and most important thing is like an automatic sealing of juvenile records, as soon as possible. I think, as she mentioned earlier, we all did things that we probably shouldn't have done when we were younger, but luckily, for a lot of us, that doesn't loom over our head as we go into adulthood, outside of just being an experience that we had and that we were able to learn from. And so that would be the first thing, is having some sort of automatic closing of juvenile records. And then the second thing I think would be connecting those young people to mentorship and, a credible messenger, if possible, to sort of have somebody who has already gone through that and knows how to maneuver adulthood and the world, with those circumstances, so that they can get the support that they need.
Could you say a little more about the credible messenger? I hear that term used quite frequently, and I'd love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, so credible messengers is a term that started in the legal system, but it's basically like a near-peer mentor, somebody who has a similar lived experience as a young person who ends up mentoring them. There's a whole podcast on aypf.org, so if you guys go, Serena, you can tell me if I got the website wrong, but AYPF there's a whole podcast series on credible messengers and the work that they do. And it did start out in the legal system, but there's a huge opportunity to use, credible messengers in education and in other spaces, and I think it would be powerful.
All right, thank you so much. And so the next question is just for everybody. How could we move assuming we're starting from the same point of departure, which is a version of either we want to get rid of this system completely or we want to limit as much as we can contact that with the legal system. How can we move the current version of that system towards actually being healing-centered and trauma-informed and something that's not punitive, whether intentional or not? Anybody?
How much time do we have? I think I would just reiterate some of the things that we were just saying about keeping kids out of the system as much as possible, right? Because the truth is that, as the research shows, most kids will age out of delinquent behavior and no intervention really is needed. I think also we need to meet kids' basic needs, right? When their needs are not being met, when they are experiencing trauma, then they may show a behavior that then pulls them into the justice system. And I think if we were to meet more of their basic needs up front and we were to address some of the trauma that young people are experiencing, witnessing violence, experiencing abuse of some kind, then kids would not need to be dealt with in the justice system. I think within the justice system itself, I mean, the juvenile justice system was founded 123 years ago, I guess. It was designed to be an alternative to the adult criminal justice system. And the truth is that there are many things in the juvenile justice system that just mirror the adult system. It's become a feeder system to the adult system, right? So if kids end up in the adult system one of two ways. They go there through, transfer or waiver to adult criminal court, which is like if you live in the DC area and you take the HOV lane to get somewhere, that's what that is, right? That's the fast track to the adult court. And the other is through the deep end of the juvenile justice system. If you end up being incarcerated in a place like Cheltenham in Maryland or Oak Hill in DC, as it used to be called, like these kinds of places, then you're much more likely to then end up in the adult criminal court. So we just need to limit that as much as possible, and we need to remove the things that are solitary confinement, use of isolation, restraints. I will just say our office gets press clips every single morning, and I share them with our whole office of juvenile justice. And I can pick out 5 or 6 states where something horrific is going on in that system. A child's been brutalized, staff have harmed children, children are not getting proper care or support. Something awful has happened, kids who've left detention who've been killed. So we read this every day, and so something fundamentally has to be transformed. We have to transform this system if we're gonna really help young people. And I know for our office, we're looking at every single policy lever that we possibly have. That's why I stood up a policy division, so we could look at this, like from our funding, can we put more healing and trauma-informed practices into operation? Can we resource more healing spaces for young people? Can we put out policies that show what actually works to help young people? Can we train the people who are training the grantees on these practices, things like that. So we're trying to look at that in every which way we can, but there is so much work to be done in this space, and I think it's gonna take all of us. That's why I'm very encouraged by the participation of all of you at this convening, because I think that it's gonna take all of us and many more to really transform this system.
So it's so incredibly hard. I felt Liz's tension at the beginning. How do you even answer a question like that, which is, how do you make the system more healing-centered? It is very hard when you, I want to think of it from an abolitionist lens, right? And that's my frame. Here's the problem. I am a defense attorney. And as a defense attorney, I guarantee you someone is getting arrested right now in this city, and tomorrow I gotta go to court, or last Saturday I was in court, not this Saturday, but Monday morning we've gotta go to court and represent that kid, right? And until we abolish the system, then we've got to figure out how to make it in the meantime, better, right? And I know that's a real tension. I'm just keeping it real. How do I navigate that? And so we think about it as making the system smaller, better, and more just. Smaller is everything that we've just been talking about. How do we close that front door, reduce the size of the juvenile legal system by 80%? Now, we can cut 80% of it out, which are all of the normal adolescent behaviors that we were talking about. If we can get rid of those, that's step one. And then what do we do with the remaining 20%? And so I'll say a word about serious offenders. That's the population. If any population is going to be in the system at all, then it's them. Then it's our children who have engaged in behaviors that hurt other people. There is empirically documented, and you know this, empirically documented strategies that work even with serious repeat offenders. Even with offenders, I can't even believe I'm using this word. My clients are not offenders. I'm like, what am I saying? With young people who have engaged in these serious offenses, right? But there's empirical research, multi-systemic therapy, family functional therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, engaging children, families, and communities to get at the root causes, right? We can turn the ship, right? Until we can abolish the entire system and get at the real strategies. So know that there is a universe in which we can reduce and make it better for the small population that's left. I can't end the answer to this without saying, though, in order to envision a true abolitionist approach to this, we have got to adopt and fully and meaningfully fund a public health strategy to community safety and school safety, right? What in the world does that look like? A public health approach is going to be trauma-informed. It's going to be relational, meaning that it has folks like, Kenvin, there, like where adults and children have meaningful relationships with one another, right? Relational. It is going to be restorative, bridging all that has been repaired in our society, and then it's going to be racially equitable. It's got to be just. That's the only way we can even think about a public health framework. In a much more practical level, a public health framework involves and includes a continuum of mental health providers, a continuum of vocational supports for young people. It includes credible messengers. It includes smaller class sizes, you all. Like, we're just not investing in the right thing. It includes social emotional learning, which I'm sure you can talk about. I just love being in space with you. Like all the things that we know work. And you see, I'm a practitioner, but I'm an academic too. So I do the research, look at the data, and talk about the social science. And the data is there, the research is there. We know what works if we would just implement it. And the thing about implementing, it's the last thing I'll say, I'm sorry. I get fired up about this. The last thing is about funding all of this is that we've got to fund it fully and completely, right? And then even while we're in the pilot stages or the early stages of our strategies, if there is a significant shooting, some high-profile incident, we can't roll it all back. We have to have courageous leaders who will stay the course, who will keep the funding in place. And so, I've known Liz for a very long time, and it's like when we say we were super excited to see, Liz take over as head of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, we can't even begin to tell you. She was on the ground doing this work, knows what needs to be funded as alternatives. That's who we have to have in place, not just in the federal government. We need folks like you at the state level as well, and at the city level, sitting here in the District of Columbia. Folks, fear leads, right? Fear leads and makes people make poor decisions about policy.
Well, and it flies against the data, right? So I know I keep saying data, and I'm not a data expert. I just communicate the data, which is that we've had a downward trend in youth arrests for more than 20 years. We've also had a downward trend in youth incarceration for 20 years. And some of the when I was saying anecdotes, I wasn't referring to your anecdotes. I was referring to anecdotes that I hear when I'm out in the field, and some people are saying, hey, there's an uptick in juvenile crime. And the truth is that there's not an uptick in juvenile crime. The National Crime Victimization Survey, which surveys people who have been victimized, what do they think the age of the person who engaged in that act is, and it continues to go down in terms of young people. The FBI Uniform Crime Report also came out 2 weeks ago. Again, it showed a reduction, overall reduction. Now, there is a little uptick in carjacking, and I think it's Kias and Hyundais that people are stealing, and that is an issue with the manufacturers. I'm not taking that off of kids doing that, but what I'm saying is that the numbers keep coming down, but that's not how it's being portrayed in the media. And it's exactly what Chris says, that anytime there's a headline like that, I'm like, oh my God, because then it just gives an excuse to do something different. And the truth is, we need to double down on what works. And to your point, some of the alphabet soup of interventions that you mentioned, we have them on our website under the Model Programs Guide. So if you go to ojjdp.ojp.gov or just Google OJJDP, you'll see the Model Programs Guide. And that gives you the evidence to show what works as an alternative to locking kids up.
Kenvin, did you want to?
I think they said everything I was gonna. No, I'm saying. No, I think everything they said is exactly how we need to go about it. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have strategies that work and that we know work. And so just focusing on those things. I was just gonna share an anecdotal while we were talking up here. I was thinking about one of my students who has become involved with the youth legal system. And on Halloween, he texted me and he was like, "Can you give me some candy?" And I was like, "Are you serious?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "What's wrong?" And he was like, "I can't go trick-or-treating because of my curfew." And so it just like, I did get him the candy, by the way, but like it put into perspective, like, these are really kids, like they're really young. He wanted to go trick-or-treating, he just wanted some candy. And so keeping that at the forefront while we do this work and while we have this conversation, I think is important.
Perfect evidence of relational,
Yeah.
of, how do you create meaningful relationships between teachers and students in ways that are effective. Do you do social emotional learning? Have you seen that?
Yeah, we do. That's why when you said it, I like smiled a little harder.
Also a perfect example of something that you alluded to, I think both of you alluded to, about the media and the way that not only is there sort of fear-mongering about crime overall and youth crime and like a lot of irresponsible, unethical, lazy journalists out there writing things with no basis in evidence or fact and not talking to either anyone on this panel about it first, rather just talking to a cop who says cop says. But also, like you mentioned your anecdote about your student who wanted to go trick-or-treating. It's about humanization. These are young people, these are children, and they get ignored, and that gets taken and removed from them, especially for Black and brown children and youth. So that it's a really key thing that you've mentioned about this is just a young person who wanted to go trick-or-treating, but can't because of some curfew issue. So thank you for mentioning that. Yeah.
I just think I want to pick back up on something both of you all said. Going back to the data, I know we keep hitting this, but the irresponsibility, right, of reporting. There's a story. I'm going to tell you a quick story about a news story that came out. You talked about carjackings are up right now. If you live in the District of Columbia, you know that is true. The question becomes, how do we frame that narrative? And the narrative right now, it's kids have run amok, right? And one.
The young woman. Oh, no.
I have a microphone. Hold on one second. I'm coming.
Thank you. How many youth or people die per year as a result of actions that were initiated as wellness checks? Do we have data that is collected in that way? I'm thinking of a Tatiana Jefferson, and I'm sure many more. And also, the question that came after the part that was said about carjacking, because there are a lot of people trying to be helpful and not knowing what that is that cause harm. So if that data is not yet available and you have thoughts about where we might get it also.
I don't know the answer to that, but I'm looking at Kristin from our team to see if she can help me figure out if that data exists. I don't know if it does.
Fascinating. They have data on people killed during a wellness check? Oh, is that what you asked about? Yeah, that's what, yeah. That's surprising. And here's the other thing is, before we get data, like we should absolutely get data, look to agencies that can do that, is do anecdote collections, right? Narrative collections. So figuring out ways to get that data. So we know high profile Tatiana, but there are other stories, right? Like, you know, and I would say, here's another one, I'm sorry, y'all. Like, here's another one, is data on people who died because they failed to do a wellness check, right? Like, I'm sure some of that is out there, but it's both and, right? But I know what you're saying. Like, somebody calls, I need help, and then they get shot and killed. Here's another one, as a defense attorney, family calls police because they need some basic service. I got locked out of my house. I need someone to take me to the hospital. Somebody in the house gets arrested, completely unrelated. And so that's another data point that we should study.
I couldn't keep track of who's next, so I'm just going to go with you right here. Rachel.
Oh, thank you. So there's a movement going on in Texas right now to abolish the last 5 youth prisons. And one thing that comes up a lot is, what do you then do with the children in these prisons? And although it would be great to abolish them, they're going to bring up that 9% of young people that have committed dangerous crimes. So what advice would you give to this movement? And also, how do you combat that narrative that comes up, which is like, actually, no, we need more youth prisons, you know?
So I think there are a couple things I would say in response to that. One is, I think there's an assumption that we need those facilities, and I would challenge that assumption, right? If you look at the data of who is actually locked up in your state or community, the vast majority of those young people do not pose a serious risk to public safety. They are high need, like they might need mental health services, they might need counseling or other supports or basic needs. They're they're high need, but not high risk. So I think that it is critically important to do an analysis of the population who is currently locked up. Second is that there are programs, as Chris so rightly pointed out, that actually serve kids who pose a high risk to public safety, who could be served in the community. And actually, we're investing in research right now with the National Institute of Justice on that. But a couple of ones that I would note, and in Texas, you have the Youth Advocate Program, YAP, Inc., which is based in Dallas. Gary Ivory is the director. I would talk to them. They exist. They've been around for 40, almost 50 years, I think. And they provide very intensive wraparound supports and services for kids and their families who are at very high risk. And so they just, in fact, I think the Urban Institute just did a study on them showing how effective their program was. And then I think the third thing is, if a child poses a very serious risk to public safety, and I would argue that that's a very small number. It's a lot smaller. It's actually smaller than the 9%, because crime an offense that you committed does not mean that you are at high risk to reoffend, right? These two things are not equal, but in the mind of the public, they are, right? The court of public opinion, as I call it. So you have to challenge the data. What I would say is, for those kids who may pose a very serious risk to public safety, there are ways to provide secure care for that kid in their community, right? So that they're near family and near other supports. One of the problems with incarceration is that we're sending kids really far away. We're breaking family ties. We are breaking the connections that those young people so deeply need to retain, right? So those are things I would look at. I'd also go to nokidsinprison.org, because there are lots of resources and information there. And also, one other thing in Texas, I just went with our whole Federal Coordinating Council on Juvenile Justice. We spent a day in Harris County, Texas, at a juvenile detention facility, which is no longer a juvenile detention facility. It's closed, it's repurposed, it is a community center, right? You're smiling, have you been there? You haven't been there. Go there and go see it, because that is the future, right? That is They're removing the doors, removing the bars, utilizing that space to provide education, counseling, support, healthcare, childcare, entrepreneurial supports for young people and their families in that community. It's absolutely amazing. There's still little things that, kind of remind you of it being a correctional center, but I just think it's a lack of imagination that we aren't able to do this. And it may be that there's a small number of kids who may need secure care for a period of time, but it shouldn't look like it does now, and we can spend a fraction of the resource that we spend now. If they spend $100K or more to lock up a kid, they can spend at least a fraction of that to invest in that kid in their community. So.
I've got
I
to
wanna
take
get one more
Administrator
question.
Ryan upstairs. She's actually speaking at the plenary, so I have to take her upstairs really quick. I'll let you all finish,
Okay.
but.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd like to- Yeah, thank you for joining us. We'll see you. So with permission from our panelists, because we have on the agenda that we would do a wrap-up at the end, would you be open to continuing questions? Okay, all right, great. Then, Jose.
I'm very triggered today in this setting right now. Just want to put that out there. My voice might quiver a little bit. I'm going to say what I got to say. Thank you. Thank you for talking about this right here. Me, I spent a lot of time behind bars. Like, sometimes I don't see myself as that. Sometimes I see myself as the adult, as people imposed on me when I was 13 years old and I was placed in a prison at 13 years old when I took one of my classmates' dollar from his pocket. And I was fingerprinted and I was paraded around the precinct and taken to court and then remanded and then sent to prison on Rikers Island as a 14-year-old kid, and then being released into another facility, another prison type facility called Children's Village at the time in New York, in God's Presence, New York, and then spending time from there, and then leaving there after 3 months, then getting arrested again at 16 years old, and then spending the majority of my life in prison. So I've seen a lot of things. I know what works and I know what doesn't. I'm an expert. I'm a leader in my community. And there's a lot of things that was said on here that I really respect. But then there's a lot of things that was said that I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. So my question is several. I have several questions. One, how could I get involved with the national council of people who come together to defend children, to defend youth? I would love to be a part of something like that, right? On a national scale. The reason why I asked that is because yesterday I came out of the Holiday Inn and they have the news downstairs. If anyone's staying at the Holiday Inn, they got the news on the TV. And the first thing I saw was that there are juveniles, and that was the word that they used, right? Juveniles, a crisis in their detention facilities right now in DC. They don't know where to put them at. So that means that they are arresting young people at an alarming rate for no fucking reason. Like that's how I see it. Because I know that they're doing that. So I want to be involved. I'm always going to be involved in that. Are there lived experts in positions where we're making decisions? Where decisions are being made on us? Are there lived experts there? People like me? Because there was another session that I heard that there's not enough credible messengers. Yes, we are out here, man. Like we out here. But the thing is that we have some of our people are doing construction. They going to get the bread because they like I need to provide for my family. And then also I don't want to you guys going about architecture, have you been thinking about the actual paint on the walls? Have you been thinking about the actual ways in which these facilities will look? Where you're bringing these children to? Things need to change because before I got to prison at 13 years old, I knew exactly what those walls looked like, the colors. I knew what the pillows looked like because the pillows were in my group home, right? The pillows were in my foster care house. It's the same exact shit in these places, everywhere. So systemically, right? We want to change things, but what we need to also understand is that we are changing things is deeper than what you really think it is. Because when you go to New York State and you go inside a courtroom, slaves have built that place that you're living in, and that you're standing in. The robe, the uniforms, the chairs, the tables, the pens, the cups. When you go to the bathroom, the hand sanitizer, the soap, all of those things. When you go inside the street signs, the lights, the license plates. Slaves in this country right now do craft industries, paying them 60 cents to 42 cents an hour to work in there. And we're happy to work there, by the way. We're happy to work there because the courts put these damn surcharges on us. When we first get arrested, you ain't got no family. You got a whole bunch of charges, and each charge is $210. And they hit you with all the charges. So it's a whole bunch of stuff, right? It's a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm triggered, but I'm empowered. I'm empowered. I'm in a unique space that I get to be triggered, and my response to being triggered is fight. Right? That's my response. But not all my brothers and sisters are like that. And we have to respect that. We have to nurture and care for that. We have to bring that. We have to bring care into our communities because our mothers and fathers sometimes are judges and lawyers. Sometimes our mothers and fathers are judges and lawyers. And we just can't do anything about it. So how are we educating them? What happened to the curriculum? What happened to their law school? What are they getting taught in a classroom that made them come into a courtroom and look at a child and say, you were trying to do the right thing. You had a fucking ankle monitor in your thing, and we told you need to get a job. And you went and tried to get a job. But you made a mistake. You had that ankle monitor on. And you're what? 15? 14 years old? Yeah, you gotta go back to jail. You gotta go back to this facility until you're 18. Hold that down. So it's like that's what we live in. So we need. I want to get down. That's like.
I think it's just a perfect way to end the segment. What I will say to you personally is, my heart goes out to you. Thank you so much for sharing, for being that voice. Continue to be that voice. Grab me afterwards and give me your contact information. So, so we can, look, I was going to say so we can plug you in. You continue to plug yourself in. I have no doubt. But, I'm happy to connect up. And the other thing that I will say, I think the greatest testament to what you are saying is I literally picked up my pen and idea for idea for idea for idea. You are giving wisdom that others need to hear, right? And just know, keep talking, folks are listening, all right?
I agree. I think that's the perfect way to end it. You started off by saying thank you, so I'm just, thank you.
Okay, thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Kenvin. I appreciate all of you. I know we have to move to the next panel, or to the plenary panel right now. I did want to say one thing because it's been a heavy session, and I appreciate, Jose, thank you so much for sharing everything you shared. And I did want to note, it's something that I recently read in the preface to Angela Davis's book, From Ferguson to Palestine, that I think is especially important in this moment, which is, the quote is, "The powerful have sent us a message, obey, and if you seek collective liberation, then you will be collectively punished. But people can unite, democracy from below can challenge oligarchy, imprisoned migrants can be freed, fascism can be overcome, and equality is emancipatory. At times like this, it's good to be surrounded by people who believe in a fairer and better society, and who have decided to act on their beliefs and dedicate their lives to trying to change the world. That may sound utopian, but the important word here is trying. It's trying and trying again, never stopping, and that is a victory in itself. And I'm proud to be here with this group of people who is always trying and never stopping. So thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it.